Hey, how's it going, everyone? Tom Morkis here, and welcome back to another broadcast of In the Trenches. Today, I sit down with Jake Jorgovan, who is the founder of Lead Cookie and Content Allies. I brought Jake on the call today initially to talk about content and content marketing, but before we actually hit record of the interview, we talked a little bit about where things were at with him and his business, and he mentioned kind of in passing that he had built his business Lead Cookie into effectively a 4-hour work week style business. And I thought it was so interesting that I said we had to take that angle. So that's what we focused on in today's call, how to build a 4-hour work week style business, or really just kind of taking a look at what Jake did to actually get there. Because, I think that's important. Your path, if this is what you want, will be different. But I think this just goes to showcase that it's possible and can be done. And that's why I wanted to talk to him about it and his reasoning and rationale for doing that. Because a lot of people who get to that position might want to continue to work full time in that business to grow it. But we talk about why Jake has decided not to do that as well. And I think it's an interesting insight into kind of how you can organize your business, your work, and your life. Finally, my big takeaway from today's call, no matter where you're at, no matter how tough it's been, no matter how many hits you've taken, no matter if you're in the trenches and you're still slogging it out and you're trying to hustle through it, whatever your goal is, if you definitely commit to it, you can achieve it. Jake shares his story, and one of the first things he mentions is that the way Lead Cookie came about was first 13 years of failure. So I think that's a good lesson to remember that no matter where you're at, even if it's tough, even if it hasn't really picked up the way you wanted, it's okay. It's experience. You're building it, and you're building that leather skin, kind of how I talk about in The Art of Instigating, and that's what it takes. You got to do it. So we also talk about getting through dips and setbacks, and it wasn't a smooth up and to the right growth pattern for Jake on this. There were dips, there were setbacks, but he was still able to do it in a very short period of time. So lots to take away from this, but those were my highlights. Finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating review on iTunes. Go to tommorkis.com/iTunes. A 5-star review really goes a long way. As you know, nobody sponsors this podcast. There's no advertisement. It's just me having conversations with people and sharing what I learned with you guys. So if you appreciate it, if you like it, if you get value out of it, or if you just want to be awesome, leave a rating and review on iTunes at tommorkis.com/iTunes. Thank you so much in advance. You're number one. Jake, so I want to talk about how you have, a couple things, how you've been able to start and grow Lead Cookie. We'll talk about that a little bit, what it is for the listeners and what that's been like, that process to get it to where it is today, which sounds like you've achieved the 4-hour work week dream, which I didn't think was actually possible. I thought it was a metaphor, but I think you're saying that it can be possible. So let's break it down if you can.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. And as I was chatting before, like it's possible, but as entrepreneurs, you're not going to just ever stop working totally. So like I do actually spend less than 4 hours a week on Lead Cookie at the moment, but like I just found other things to go put my time toward and work on in that time. And I think that's actually, there's a lot of interesting things in that because I think without that, I think I would just find ways to twiddle my thumbs on Lead Cookie all week if I didn't. So,
well, and that's kind of why I want to zoom in on this, and we'll see. We'll dive into a bunch of different areas from this kind of starting point, because with Lead Cookie, I'll get to some of these questions in a minute, but sometimes I think, if you're doing something really well, it's like, why not continue to expand that? So I'm going to be really curious why you decided to, start another business and things like that. But before we get to all that really good stuff, give everybody, the listeners, what is Lead Cookie? How does it work? And what was the genesis of it?
Yeah, so Lead Cookie, we are a done-for-you LinkedIn lead generation business. So basically, we manage our clients' LinkedIn accounts and start warm conversations between them and their ideal customers. And so that's kind of the overarching piece of the business is really like we manage LinkedIn profiles and help people generate leads and work with a lot of B2B companies in that sense, or people selling to other businesses. And the genesis of this really came from I was doing consulting and just doing a bunch of different stuff. And at some point I had this idea of I was kind of sick of trading just time for money. And I was like, I feel like I'm ready for a real business again. And so I just sat down, wrote out a handful of ideas. And the one idea that I put down was LinkedIn marketing agency. me is what I wrote down at the time. And that was kind of how it started. I went out and I just researched what was working, what was everyone doing on LinkedIn, and decided to just make a business that basically offered those best tactics in a done-for-you fashion. And that's really how Lead Cookie started. And then just started reaching out, offering that to people in my network, and have grown it up to a team of around 30 people today.
And what was the timeline again? When did you start that?
So it is going on. It's about 2 years and a quarter right now. So we started in July of 2017. So it was 2 years in July. We're recording this, in the start of October. So, it's been, just a little bit over 2 years at this point.
Okay, a little bit over 2 years. You have a team of 30, you said, and it basically runs itself.
Yep. And a good chunk of the team is in Philippines or Colombia, or different kind of locations and everything. But and then quite a few people in the US or North America as well. And it pretty much runs without me. I do kind of one-on-one coaching calls with my team at this point, and I show up on the stand-ups and occasionally help on like some marketing projects here and there. But for the most part, they run and own pretty much everything.
So I want to, before we get into where it's at now, I'm kind of curious about a little bit of this as you grew it. Now that we have obviously hindsight 2020, so you can look back and you see, well, where you're at now, it's successful. It took about 2 years. What were those critical things you did from that inception of that idea? You said you reached out to people directly. So give me a little bit of an idea of that first few months getting it started. What were the critical things you did? And then what were the things you did later? I want people to get a context for the critical marketing and sales things you have to do versus, other things that maybe are flashy, but aren't as essential to the early success of a startup.
Yeah, so I'll call out two maybe less tactical things, but one was probably 13 years of failure leading up to this, and just trying different things. And so I think there's just, for a lot of people, when they hear an interview like this, I can see how it's oh, well, how come I can't hit that? And so the truth is, I had run an agency before, and there's entrepreneurial skill and chops. I've been freelancing for 4 years, and so I don't want to I just want to make sure to say that, not to discourage people, and just because I know a lot of new entrepreneurs, they just they see that and they think that if you're just brand new to the game, and they can get discouraged if they don't hit that same thing, and just to recognize that there was a large entrepreneurial journey leading up to this, and this is finally a success after trying this game for 15 years. So that's one point I'll hit on. And then another thing was just that at this point, I had been honestly trying and failing at a bunch of business attempts before this. And so I did actually pull in a business coach for the first time, really, when I started this up. And that was actually really helpful to, I think, help me level up and get out of that cycle of just attempting and failing at things over and over again. So that was honestly a big thing I think that went different. The tactical pieces of launching were just spinning up a landing page, putting together something really crappy, and then just reaching out to people in my network and trying to sell it to somebody that I knew, and then get started from there. But there were just so many things that came after that I just had to learn and level up on as an entrepreneur, really, to be able to actually then grow that and scale that beyond just those first few customers.
Yeah, because as far as I'm kind of curious to ask a little bit about the coach in that regard, where you felt the coach was really helpful for you. Yeah, maybe break that down for us. I'm kind of curious. That's kind of fascinating.
Yeah. So one of the things, I guess my belief when hiring a coach is to find someone who has done something similar to what you want to do. And so I ended up hiring Alex McClafferty, who was co-founder of WP Curve. And so, they were a productized service. They built it up to over $1 million in revenue and then sold it to GoDaddy. And so I knew Alex before that, and then he did this, and I was just wow, I've just been piddling around the last 2 years. You built and sold a company to GoDaddy. You're doing something that I'm not. And so brought him on as a coach, and that and I think just as an entrepreneur, you just don't know what you don't know. And there's endless amounts of information and books and tactics and podcasts and stuff. And you can just go in circles and just get totally lost. And or just kind of confused, or your headspace, or just so many different things. And just having a coach to just steer you, or focus you on the right things, or to just be hey, stop reading so many books and just focus on what's in front of you. What needs to be done, quit looking for the answer elsewhere, kind of things. So, working with Alex on that was super helpful. And Like there's just so many, and then there's just so many tactical things that I learned, like how to do one-on-ones with my team, like how to run meetings, how to like organize or just like track metrics. Like there's just so many like nuanced, like tactical things I learned from that. And then also just like mindset shifts from just working with someone who was more experienced that leveled me up infinitely faster than if I had tried to do it on my own.
That's awesome. Would you say then that in some context, like it was, especially maybe when you were first getting started, you were like, when you had that first call or the first few calls or you were interacting, your vision of what you thought were like the top priorities, the most important things to do, sometimes wouldn't turn out to be the case. Like, is that kind of part of the discovery process that you found was helpful with a coach?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it's just and like that like a lot of times you're focusing on the wrong things and you just gotta like call that out, or like you're about to just make some stupid decision and like he just can like it just got to the point like where eventually like I started to just be like, oh, I'm gonna bring him this, and like you start to just know like and like just because like you just have him like shoot down some of your decisions sometimes. Like there was, I don't know how many times I was like, man, we got to offer cold email. Like everybody's asking us for cold email. Like we got to do that. And every time I bring it to him, he was like, do you really want to do that? Like it's going to make things way more complicated. You got a good thing going. And like there would just be like decisions like that would like kind of pop up and like to just think of like the havoc that would have created or the lack of our competitive advantage if we had actually launched something. And like now I look at this and like in retrospect, it's like, man, I'm so glad we didn't go down that route. Like we just owned the one space we were in. And so like just really helpful to have someone, just like steering you from bad decisions to point you to the actual problems. Yeah, just level you up your skills in so many ways.
And this thing was bootstrapped, right?
Yep.
Okay. And so what were some of the critical hires and how early on? How much of it were you doing just by yourself? And how quickly did you get somebody on board to, who's your first hire, for instance?
Yeah. So with my consulting, I had been doing good enough with consulting to where I actually had a guy that was working for me, basically like kind of as a full-time contractor, and he kind of grew and became a head of ops for us. So very quickly, I had someone who I could just hand things to from the start. So like right out of the gate, I just tried to get like the monotonous part of the delivery off of our plate. And probably within like the first 2 months, we started hiring some virtual assistants, and then probably around like 3 months, we hired our first US team member. And probably another fourth month, we hired another US team member. Then we actually kind of grew a little too quickly and then had to lay some people off. So like made some mistakes. Like this wasn't a perfect journey. There was definitely like havoc and mistakes along the way. But yeah, we started like my whole focus early on was just get the service delivery off of my plate. And then the strategic piece of things like the strategy, the writing copy, those kind of harder things that were less operational and more strategic, that probably took about a year to get off my plate. But eventually trained up a guy, Rick, who's now one of our lead strategists. And he took that over and then eventually found a couple other guys to kind of expand into those roles as well. But it was quick on operations off of my plate and then slow to get the strategy and the sales off of my plate.
That makes sense. But it seems like a natural progression, right? Because it sounds like kind of you to some degree, some of the lower value activities, maybe is one way to put it. You got off your plate right away to a degree. Is that about right?
Yeah. I'm actually really, really bad at repetitive things. And so my ops guy fired me from like the most basic role we have at our company is sending connection requests. And like at any day I had to fill in or something because someone was like out sick or they were like had too much work. I would just like make like 5 typos like a day, and they were like, Jake, you can't do this anymore. You're horrible. Like, so it was like actually like really necessary to get me out of ops. And then, like the strategic stuff is harder. Like you can't just, it's not ABC. You have to kind of train people how to think and like really coach people over, months to get them into a role versus ops. You can typically train someone in a week or two on a very kind of mechanical type role.
So you said one of the hiccups you had was like hiring, maybe trying to grow a little too fast and then having to go through that hiccup of having to like, let people go, which I'm sure anybody who's done that it's hard. And also those who are, growing and or trying to grow, obviously it's something you don't want to happen if you can help it. We kind of think that the path is going to just be up and to the right, but sometimes there are setbacks, and that didn't break you, even though you did actually, it sounds like, grew too fast. So what were your learning lessons from that? I'm kind of curious, like, what was it that you pulled the trigger on too soon? And then how'd you figure that out quickly and adjust fire? Because I feel like sometimes when things like that can happen, it can kind of topple something pretty quickly if it's not fixed.
Yeah. So there's a perfect storm of mistakes that happened. So one was just not anticipating churn. And I think that a lot of people, that when they get into like having a monthly recurring revenue business, you can just like, it's really easy to just, I guess, like the mistake I made was like, oh, we signed a new customer, that's new MRR. And like, you just start planning and assuming that it's just going to keep happening like that. And like, just literally like just was naive and just wasn't making decisions with like churn in mind. So it was hiring, trying to get ahead of growth instead of kind of like, just letting our operations like kind of push itself to the limits each time. We were constantly like hiring to like prepare for growth. And then so you have a bunch of churn, and then you have people that are underutilized. And then like it's, so that is like one piece of this is I was hiring for growth, didn't really anticipate for churn. And when that started to happen, we just basically had underutilized team members, which was one part. The other big mistake I made, there's a guy a sales coach that I'm friends with now, Damian Thompson. He talks about this as the 100K mistake that people make is, I tried to hand off sales before it was ready. Like I just like wanted to, like I was like 7 months in, and I was just like, all right, I'm gonna like hand off sales. I'll be done everything, and I don't have to do anything. And I was like all proud of this for like 3 weeks until I looked at our numbers and was like, oh my God, we're not making any sales. And the sales we're making are like asking for refunds because they're selling the wrong people. And so like I totally botched the handoff of the sales process because I treated it like an ops process. Like I could just, document this is the ABC steps to sales, and I didn't actually spend the time to train on the lighter pieces of it, like the client fit pieces of it, and I let go of that way too quickly. So sales drops off. At the same time, we have churn, we have people underutilized, and I just hit a point where I'm like, if I don't lay people off, I'm not going to be able to pay them. And I literally then went like 2-3 months without getting a paycheck, and just to try to make sure we could like pay the team that I did have on board, that they could keep remaining and we didn't totally crumble. And as soon as I got back in sales, I was able to redeem that, close a bunch of deals, and get things back and going. And that brought confidence. There was definitely a lot of fear in the team at that point, and turned things back around. And I then held on to sales for probably about the next 10 months before I handed it off again. And by the time I handed it off, I was finally like, it was systematized, and I spent a long time handing off that process, making sure it was done well. So that's kind of the story and the madness that happened there.
And I know might be tough to go into specifics, but I'm curious on this before and after. What was the before process that you handed off that was ineffective? And what was the after product that you handed off that 10 months later? Like, what was different about it?
Yeah, it was, one was that like whenever, give you an idea, like whenever I handed off sales, first of all, like I handed like sales and strategy at the same time, and like made those the same role for Rick, who's now one of our strategists. And like he wasn't like, and so he's doing like he's basically doing like everything strategic. So I like ultimately we ended up splitting those off into 2 roles, a sales role and an account strategy role. So that was like one key difference. The other thing was that like by holding on to it for another 10 months, like I got so busy in that period of time, like because I also took back over account strategy for about 6 months before I handed that back over to Rick. And during those 6 months, like I got up to the point where I was running strategy on 40 accounts and I was running sales. So like that's like 40 accounts that are like coming directly to me. So like I optimized the hell out of that to where like every smallest thing of like setting up a Google Doc or like anything that could be Zapier, like automated was zapped. Anything that I could have like virtual assistants on the team helping me with, they were helping me. And like to the point where like all I did was calls, strategy, or like planning. and really just like honed in on that role to where like I automated it the best it could be. So that way I could just focus all my thoughts on like the higher level strategic work. So by the time I had handed strategy or sales back over, like all of that streamlining had been like almost as optimized as I could make it. And I was able to just spend all my time, very little time teaching processes, and a majority of the time teaching people just like the tangential, like the pieces. Like I had written frameworks on how to sell. I had written buyer persona documents, like what to look out for, red flags, like all of these like frameworks and ways to train these people on kind of the softer skills that they needed to know.
And to clarify, when you said you kind of separated sales from strategy, just to be clear on that, strategy meaning for the client itself, like the lead generation type strategy, that piece?
Yeah. So for our clients, we write their outreach scripts for them. We optimize their LinkedIn profiles. We have to pull the targeting together. So yeah, strategy is like the person who comes up with all of that and then hands those strategies to the ops team to implement.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can see how in that context, closing the client and then the onboarding, initial onboarding and that kind of being part of maybe the strategy process being two separate things. And then even the implementation maybe being that third thing. Is that kind of how you set it up, as like these three phases or these three kind of core aspects of your business?
Yep. Yeah. So there's like basically sales, strategy, and then operations. Yeah. Yep. So those are like the three core pieces, but didn't see all that as clearly when I was just like rushing to get everything off my plate.
It's tough though, man. It's how do you see it sometimes? Because you just, you're doing it. But I guess that, by being aware of what you're doing and taking the feedback, and then it sounds like you had, the coach was helpful for you as well. But I think for those who are listening, it's like, I don't know if there's some important advice here or takeaways. I think part of that is just, not everything's going to go exactly how you planned. You will make mistakes. It happens. Like we all make unforced errors sometimes, or sometimes there are forced errors and things like that. But it's like being aware of it. Like sounds like you caught it pretty quickly. And then you're like, okay, I took it back under, I'm going to build this out. You figured out what one of the critical or some of the critical areas of where it was breaking or failing. And you were able to then fix it and get it back off your plate again. I mean, within a year, like that's not a bad turnaround time when you think about it. When some people never get out of that role, for instance, some people might never get beyond what you were doing at the time before you'd done that first handoff, and then it's a good, full-time business or full-time job for you, right? But you wanted to build something you could hand off or that you could sell.
Yeah, it's So I think a lot of these things, like anyone who's going to like starting down the entrepreneurial path, and just like, you got a lot of mistakes coming. Like it's the only way. Like maybe some people are just flawless and they can just get through all of it without this, but there's just a lot of painstaking moments along the way. And I feel like that's just part of the learning journey and everything.
It is. Part of the fun too. And obviously as long as we keep winning, and I think as long as you keep going, you do. Like, I think, for those who are listening, I think for guys like you and me, Jake, like when I think about this, it's like, I think anybody who's really committed to it can learn from feedback, has like, or just can learn and pays attention and can spot patterns and figure things out and just will keep going. I do believe to some degree, like success is, I don't want to say inevitable, but it's like, you will get there. I think. I think it's only a matter of time if you're just committed and you can learn from your mistakes and you can, and from those around you. I mean, I think there's shortcuts, and I'm not saying it goes fast, but I think it's possible if you just stick it out. It was like kind of you said at the beginning, it was like 13 years of failure leading up to this, and then boom. It's like, yeah, it takes a lot of experience, right?
Yeah. One thing I'll say, just my advisor, Alex McClafferty, one of the things he asked me at the start was, assuming that this business is going to be, or assuming that any business you start will be a success, why are you choosing this business? And that was like a really interesting question, because, it's like, I think where I was at coming into it, and where I think a lot of earlier stage entrepreneurs are at, is they're constantly like, is this idea going to work? Like, is this going to happen? Like, can this work? And like, they're constantly like asking people, like, do you think this will work? And like, the point of that question is just like, anything will work, if you're committed to it. You might have to change or adjust it along the way, but to shift your mindset from like away from like, is this going to work, to I'm going to make this work. It may not look exactly like I envision it, but I'm going to commit and make this work, is just like a total mindset shift. Because I think there's so many people, they just get into like, oh, is it going to work? And then they get into it and they don't get immediate results, and then they quit and they think it's a failure. And there's just like something to just like assuming that you're going to succeed. And just really thinking through that model and that business while you're choosing it, it just was like a really helpful thing for me at the start.
And what was your reason in this case, just to give some context or an example, I suppose, when you're saying that?
Yeah, I think for this one, like at this point, and it's interesting because that question, it's different for me today, but
right.
At the time when I even went back and like I have all these notes, I've got like 200 pages of like coaching notes that I took, and like my answer to that was just like I had spent several years in outbound consulting, and so I felt like I had this unique knowledge and skill set, and I saw this like rising trend of LinkedIn outreach as a growing area, and I felt like I was at the front of this, and so I was like I just feel like I've got the skills to build a business. I have this unique opportunity where I'm like the front end of what I see as a rising trend. And this looks scalable. Like none of my other ideas, like I had tried to do a few things, and in reality, they probably could have worked if I'd really stuck through with them. But they were also a little bit more complex, more difficult. They weren't as easy to systematize. So there was kind of more inherent complexity in them. And this, I just saw the simplicity of building it, or of like the operations of it. And I just saw like how it just overlapped with my skills. It wasn't like some self-actualizing, like my purpose of life is in this business, but it was just something where I kind of saw this kind of like merging of all these opportunities in the market.
That's fascinating. And so when you got it to the point where it's at now today, that's pretty fast, man. 2 to 3 years. It's like, and to get it up to the size that it's at now, and for you to effectively just kind of step away from it, outside of, a few meetings here or there, it sounds like it's in a position where, if you would want to sell it, you could, but you're holding on to it, you still own it, and now you're spending time doing things you enjoy. So talk me through that a little bit, because, and I mentioned this or hinted at this at the beginning of the conversation. I've talked to some people about this, and I'm still trying to figure out, like what's the, maybe what my style is a little bit, but it's interesting is what you're doing is, it feels right to me a little bit. But there's some people who might argue that like, if you got it to the point where it's like, you could step away, it is a 4-hour work week kind of thing. It's like, what would those extra, 30 hours in the week or 40 hours in the week get you if you reinvested it back into that? What's your reasoning for doing that? And then also not necessarily selling it, but just kind of like, holding on to it?
Yeah. So there's like, I guess like a handful of pieces to that. Mm-hmm. One is, I don't know if actually the moment that I started the next company, it was actually like the best idea. Like it probably like, so like, I can't say that like the path I'm going is definitely the right decision. And maybe there is value or opportunity and, pursuing it more. But the interesting thing is like, we've grown from doing almost 50K a month to 70K a month while I've stepped away. Like, so it's growing without me working on it, which is crazy. And so I think like a big part of my reasoning for it was like looking at it and just, some of the things that I look at is like in terms of our growth is to basically build and offer more services to that customer base. And so like I'm looking, I guess, at like other partnerships of how do we offer like PPC to this market or other things along those lines. And so I see, I guess, the avenues for growth of this being to kind of spin up more and more offerings. And that's kind of some of the stuff that I'll still do is kind of like we did recently develop like an appointment setting offering, which is kind of like a step further. So some of the things I still get involved with a bit are like kind of product development. But for me, like I don't want to like it's running, it's doing so smoothly and it's generating cash. And I don't want to just like disrupt it. I was actually like, before I started up this other business, I was like constantly like screwing with stuff. And like, I think I annoyed my team a lot. And starting up this other business, just like, it gave me a route to think about how do I build something that's going to last forever? Because the other piece of it is that LinkedIn, it is a marketing tactic. And this is something that, when you're thinking about early stages of a business, like, will this be relevant in 10 or 20 years? And the truth is, yes, LinkedIn and sales on LinkedIn is always going to be relevant, probably in some capacity, unless it pulls a total MySpace. But it's going to get disrupted. It's going to be changed. We're at the whims of a platform that can change or evolve or, do things differently. And that's kind of I guess, lack of control, and that's inherently baked into the business model, is something that kind of made me want to, I guess, like diversify my risk as well. So that kind of made me not want to put all of my eggs into this basket, and start to think through, how do I build another business that is completely robust, that is completely, can stand the test of time. And that's kind of where Content Allies came from, is trying to think through a model that is never going to become irrelevant, or there's no single external party that could disrupt or change things or force us to have to rebuild our operations in 2 years or stuff like that. So that's, I guess, some of the kind of like reasoning or motivation behind it. Can't say I can't say I'm certain it's the right decision, but it's the one I'm taking and committed to. So feeling it out.
Well, I think that's it. It's like, it depends. Right. It's like there's no right or wrong answer. I really don't believe that. I think there's just preference, and because there's just so many ways to do this stuff. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with having, a side hustle or a side business that's making you money. That's great. But I get the traditional, approach to it conceptually, where it's like, oh, go all in and really grow it. I can see the value in that too. But it sounds like what you're doing is you are feeling it out fairly intuitively, and Content Allies sounds like the next, the next logical step. So walk me through that. How fresh is Content Allies? Where are you guys at with it? And where is it going?
Yeah, so that basically started around November of last year and went through like probably about 6 months of me trying out different things and flopping around and failing again. And what we ended up landing on is basically we do content marketing for consultants to turn them into thought leaders. So we work with people who are really smart experts in their field, but they never have time to turn their ideas into content marketing. And we basically interview them to extract expertise out of their head, or help them produce podcasts to turn them into thought leaders and network them in their field. And so that one is, again, we ramped this up, like I said, in around November. I've been building that up, and it's kind of been really where most of my focus has been. I'm still kind of in the sales seat for that, still really streamlining all of our systems and processes and stuff. We're kind of, this one's a little different than Lead Cookie in that we have multiple products. But, on the earlier stage of that journey, trying to learn and not make the same mistakes I made with Lead Cookie, but also build something that is robust and stands the test of time, really.
Were you able to tap into like the resources you already had from the other business to like get this off the ground? Was that helpful at all?
It definitely was helpful. And it was, so it was really useful to have that. But at some point it was also like kind of screwing with me, because actually I started it kind of as like another service line of Lead Cookie. And then I quickly realized I was like, this needs to be its own business. With trying to do content without a vertical niche is really hard, because like you're just going to end up being like super generalist and writing for all different types of businesses. And so Lead Cookie is horizontal focus. And so we focus just like anybody in B2B space. And so like to try to do content for our entire wide breadth of of like Lead Cookie would just be like really hard. And I was like, this is just like, it's confusing me. It's like, I'm struggling in my head to like keep these straight. It's confusing my team. So I just broke it off into its own business. And I was like, all right, so we're going after like consultants, mainly like management consultant type personas. And this is who we're going to focus toward on content. And like, it just helped to isolate and make it its own thing. But at the start, I definitely did utilize kind of like Lead Cookie a bit to help get that going. And we, still cross-use services. So yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds like it's also like applies to probably the same demographic. I mean, it's still consultants to a degree, right? So like at least maybe portions, if not large portions or large sections of your current, customer client base might be interested in something like this as well. Was that early adoption for you at all? Have you done that? Was that part of the plan as well?
Yeah, definitely. So I kind of went through and audited, and it was, it's probably like maybe like a 10 to 15% overlap of like Lead Cookie customers that were like a good fit for Content Allies. There's probably, I thought there was more at the start. And then as I actually got into it.
Yeah, that sounds a lot less than I would have expected.
Yeah, it's just like we just have so many different types of customers, or maybe some of those maybe they got disqualified because like they actually were already doing content or had those things taken care of. But It's just like the lead cookie, we just got such a wide breadth of customers there. And then on the Content Ally side, when we really tried to focus down on that persona, it was less overlap than I guess I thought it would be too from the start. So.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I want to circle back real quick. Two questions I thought of that I think are kind of important, because you mentioned you basically stepped away. You said that the sales for lead cookie have grown, month over month. It's gotten better. So like that's obviously just showcases a system that's effective. Do you have then like somebody you have hired or is like the CEO effectively, or like an operations, not even maybe COO, but that kind of runs everything and. Or how do you actually organize that piece? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So basically, I have a COO who kind of oversees all ops and everything like that. Mm-hmm. And then I guess I still act as like the CEO role. I'll still set the quarterly targets and priorities. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing I'll still do for the company. Mm-hmm. So we actually just had our quarterly planning meeting today and everything. And then, but after that, like the rest of the team really kind of takes a lot of ownership over everything. So, I still maybe do some of like the bigger picture thinking of stuff, but so it's not necessarily a CEO role, but a lot of the strategy team and my guy who runs sales and everything, Isaac, they do a lot of that strategic thinking and kind of bring it. And then I just kind of help kind of coach and guide them all in that direction. But I guess that's a role that I still do in that small minimal time that I spend coaching each week.
Got it. And then what was the other? On terms of marketing and sales. So again, being able to step back, it's like the holy grail, I think, for a lot of people who might be listening. It's like, I feel like I can step back from everything but sales often. It's always one of the harder things for me to step back from. Maybe because I haven't thought through the systems enough or something like that, or it's just like a fear where I think too highly of myself, thinking like nobody else can do what I do. But the ability to like step back and then see sales grow is pretty impressive. So do you have somebody that like kind of manages that process or also on that front, like where do you guys, if it's you leading that charge, where do you decide to focus your time and energy on the marketing and sales side for this thing so that it does keep growing?
Yeah. So, so like the biggest thing to know, like to think about if you're going to hand off sales and is that you just when I handed off sales, it was to the point where I felt like a robot, showing up on calls. Mm-hmm. It was so systematic where I was literally saying the exact same things. And because we didn't have any customization in our product, it was just really the only the intangible was deciding if people were going to be a right fit or maybe handling some oddball questions. And so I got Isaac in, who runs our sales now, into that seat. And it kind of was just with him shadowing and everything, but I had a whole sales playbook, everything there. And that's the thing where if you can get sales to the point where it is really kind of robotic how you're showing up, then you can hand it to somebody else. And the interesting thing is that it's a disservice. And I think this is a fear that a lot of people have in handing off sales. But if you can build a really, really great process, and I have this whole sales playbook I put together. I actually have a bunch of pieces of that published on my blog where I publish everything our sales scripts and our process and stuff. But I don't think I could have gotten sales where it is today if I were still running it, because I just couldn't dedicate that much time toward it. And Isaac actually took it and made it better, just because you hit a point when you're the owner and you're doing all these other things and you're just exhausted. And I just got into this repeat pattern. And then he starts going on and starts figuring out these things that he can tweak and optimize and improve in it. Makes our CRM systems better and all this stuff. So I guess getting it repetitive and then training someone else into there was just super, super powerful. And then just having him even tackles marketing projects as well, other things to kind of accelerate lead volume and help with the flow of that as well. So, and also I'll say it helped that we had a good flow of inbound leads. We had built up so much marketing momentum and word of mouth about us in the industry that we just have a steady flow of leads. So he could just hop right in and then just basically take over the fire hose of leads and just close those, which is different, I think, than a lot of people. They also try to hand over sales whenever they're I don't have sales. I have a sales problem. Let me hire a sales guy. And that probably won't work.
Right.
And like I said, a sales friend I have to Damon Thompson calls it the 100K mistake. He's I got a sales problem. Let's hire a salesperson. No, it needs to be I'm overwhelmed with doing sales activities that are working. I need to replace myself. That's kind of the place you need to get to hand that off.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. And so it sounds like with this, it's thinking through the whole thing. It's lead generation through the close and then handing off, to the onboarding, we'll say, or something like that. But again, if you, in your case, obviously the system you perfected was, I guess, ways to break it up and think about, and maybe you did this. It sounds like you did a little bit, but I don't want to put words in your mouth either. But it was like, for the sales process, like once the lead is in, there's a certain set, there's a checklist you're going to go through, for lack of a better way to describe it, a process, step by step, phase 1 through done or whatever, that once you built that into the playbook, somebody could just step in and take that role over. And then maybe another role then is, or maybe this is the same person, but is the, lead generation piece. It's getting new people opting in or signing up or scheduling a call or what have you. But is that kind of how you thought about it and broke it up? Did you find those were like two separate pieces, or did you kind of combine them?
Yeah. So I guess the kind of a broken up, I guess we haven't broken out the lead gen and the marketing piece yet. So, but yeah, definitely all the onboarding is broken out. The lead gen and marketing, because we did, I did a ton with content and I gave a bunch away and just my personal brand or thought leadership. We just have, we just have a flow of leads coming in now, just through marketing, momentum basically that has been built up. So we haven't actually had to replace anyone on the lead gen side of things. We now just as a team started kind of all pitching in to kind of create more content, and that's again helping drive more leads and stuff. But so we don't actually have anyone specifically that's had to own lead gen or demand generation at this point. Something we're considering in addition to, but right now we just have so much momentum that we just I was able to put someone in on closing and still see the company grow pretty significantly during that time.
That's awesome. Cool, man. Well, hey, I know we're at over time, but I just want to say this was really an interesting, fascinating conversation. Look into how you built Lead Cookie, what you're doing now with Content Allies. I want to encourage everybody to go scope out your work at contentallies.com. And of course, just, thank you so much for being on In the Trenches, Jake. It was a real pleasure having you.
No problem. Thanks for having me on here, Tom.
And that wraps up another broadcast of In the Trenches. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating review. Just go to tommorkes.com/iTunes, and that'll take you to iTunes where you can leave a 5-star rating review. And that really helps spread the word about this podcast. And finally, if you need help growing your online business or generating new traffic, leads, and sales at a profit, reach out to me at tom@tommorkes.com or head over to the website tommorkes.com and sign up for the free newsletter.